you want to make your processing sketch into a video file, processing has some built-in features to do that. What we're going to do is we're going to save frames every time it loops through the draw, and then we're going to have processing stitch all those frames together and make it into a .mov movie file. So the first thing we need to do is simply put in the code save frame, and we want this to be at the end of all of our code, but right before the closing bracket, the closing curly bracket for the draw. So at the end. Now if I just put in save frame, this is going to have it save frames every time it loops through the draw, which is exactly what I want. But it's going to save all these frames, I'll just play it for a second, in the same folder that my sketch is in. And you can see that's what happened right here. So here's my sketch, and here are all my frames. Now you're going to want to save about 900 or maybe even more frames. So that gets a little bit messy. What would be better is if we had all of these guys in their own folder. And so they're separate from our original processing sketch. So I'll just delete them. And let's change this code to be a little more specific and have it save it in a folder. So this time, within my parentheses, I'm going to give it an argument. And the argument's going to be the name of a folder that processing will create for me, and then the file type that I want it to save my frames as. This all needs to be done within quotes. So I'm going to put a quote, and I'll write out stills. That's a typical name that I use for folders when I'm going to have processing save a lot of stills for me, or maybe images or frames. You can really call it whatever you want. / 4 hashtags dot the file extension I want to save my stills as. I'm going to choose PNG. End of quotes. So the 4 hashtags is just so it doesn't override the names itself. So it'll save up to 9,999 frames. You don't need that many. And I wrote .png because I find that the PNGs work well when I want to make my stills into a video. But you could also try it as JPEG or a TIFF possibly. Okay, so now at least when I press start, and it's going to save a frame every time it loops through the draw, it's going to be putting in a folder that is called stills. So it'll be a little bit neater. It's just all in a folder. And if I want, I can just delete that folder. Now, the next thing is you want to be able to know how many frames it's saving. And we're going to do this with a print ln. Remember, we call that print line. Print ln, and the argument we're going to give it is frame count. So what this is going to do is tell us down here in the console, it's just simply going to read through the frames for us. So I'll see what we're going through. We've looped through the draw once, we've looped through it twice. And the reason we want to have this is because when it's saving frames every time it loops through the draw, it slows it down. So it's really hard to get a sense of how long that your sketch is playing back. Let's say you want to have a movie that's a minute long. You can't just play this for a minute and stop recording, because that's not going to equal a minute-long movie because it gets slowed down in the process of making them. But what you can do is figure out how many frames do you need to get a minute-long movie. So when we get to the end and we use the processing tool of the movie maker to make our movie, we have a choice of frame rate. So how many frames of these that we're going to be saving do we want to put per second? And the number I generally start with is 15 frames per second. I find that gives me the most accurate, sort of smooth playback. It might end up being too fast or too slow for you, and this might be a number that you change. So, but 15 is a good starting point. So if we take the number 15 and we multiply it by 60, right, 60 seconds in a minute, we get 900. So I want to be able to get up to 900 frames to be able to give me a 1 minute long movie if I'm putting 15 of those frames per second. So that's the reason I would have this here, is so that when I press the playback, I'm looking down here in the console as it is counting up the numbers. Now I'm not going to let this go all the way up to 900 just for the sake of the video. I will pause it though, and I'll come back once we're at 100. Okay, so I have 100, which is enough for just running this example, and I'm going to stop my sketch from running. And now, if I could double check that it's there, I can go to Sketch, Show Sketch Folder. Hey, here's my folder that processing created for me, and I have my 100 went up to 117. Perfect. Okay, so now back over to processing. I'm going to go to Tools, Movie Maker, and the first thing I have to do is find this folder. And it's not necessarily going to open up to the correct folder. This is the sketch that I was on before where I made my previous movie, so I have to browse and look for this folder here, the one I called Stills. So I have to hit choose, and I go and find where I have that folder, and I believe it's in here, Sketch 20th Century, and then I click on Stills and I hit open. So you want to make sure that the last name that you have here is the name of the folder that has your stills in it. The other things that you want to adjust here is make sure that same size as originals is checked, and the frame rate, as I said, I'm recommending you start at 15, but that you may end up having to adjust that. So you would just say, do this process again. You don't have to make the stills again. You would just have it make the movie again at a different frame rate. Last step is create movie. It's asking you now where to save it. I do want to save it in the same folder where I had it originally, where I have my processing sketch, so I have to go and find that. Here it is. And so I want to save it directly in this folder. I don't want to save it in with my stills. It's going to be right in my 20th century folder here. And I'll call it short movie. And now it's going to stitch them all together, and it's going very quickly because I only had 100 frames. And it's now here in my folder. If it doesn't play for you in your computer, it might just be that your default player doesn't play back the QuickTime movie format. So I always do it with VLC. You might want to download its free VLC, or you can also throw it into Premiere, but it should work. You're not trying to open up the 10th file, just something to keep in mind, but you're opening up the regular one. And here's my very short movie because I only saved 100 frames. All right, so that's really all there is to it. Just remember, save your frames, save frame. Use this code so that they go into a folder, print line, frame count. You can count up to about 900, and then go through your tools, and you'll get to the movie maker, choose the right folder, same size as original, frame rate, and create the movie. And that should be all there is to it.